Okay, well, here we are, New Year. Christmas is over. However, if we were to be on the uh, medieval calendar, this would be the 11th day of Christmas. We still have one more day of Christmas. I know, I know. So hurry up, wrap a present, and give it to someone you love for the 11th and 12th day of Christmas. And sing them the song. Well, because we're not on the medieval calendar, but we're on our calendar, and the Christmas season is over, I'm going to get back into looking at the book of Exodus. We're about halfway through the book of Exodus, somewhere in that range, and I have to tell you that we are really through the most exciting part of the book of Exodus. We're through the 10 plagues, we're through the crossing of the Red Sea, we're through the provision of manna and water, and now God has given Moses the Ten Commandments. So we're through the exciting part of the book of Exodus. Most people who read through the book of Exodus hit this chapter, the last part of chapter 20, and then moving on, and you kind of skim through it. Because what we're going to get next are the rest of the laws of the covenant that God makes with Israel. And not only that, but we get the description of the temple and how to build the temple and how it should be put together and use of the temple and all that kind of thing, or the tabernacle. So it gets, for some, this would be the boring part. For others, this would be the exciting part. Depends how you're geared. But it is less story and more instruction now. So the last time we left the people of Israel was verse 21 of chapter 20, and it said
Easy for you to say.
yes, brand new year. Apparently, it's not working for me. The people remained at a distance while Moses approached the thick darkness where God was. So that's where we left them. The people have gathered around Mount Sinai. They have seen and witnessed and experienced the awe-inspiring presence of God in the thick cloud and the thunder, in the lightning, in the fire, in the smoke, in the sound of the trumpets. They are in awe over God, and they are shaking and trembling before God. They're at the foot of the mountain. There's a border around that foot of the mountain that God says, make sure they do not come up on the mountain or even touch the mountain. And so Moses goes up, and they are incredibly in awe of Moses being able to go up the mountain and into that thick darkness and meet with God. God has given them the Ten Commandments, and now God will continue to give Moses the rest of the law of the covenant that the Israelites need to know. And that's what we're going to begin looking at. So we have less story, more instruction, and I should say too that, this is the old covenant. So when we read the laws and requirements of the old covenant, we need to know that they aren't laws that we need to follow. They aren't requirements that we need to follow. We aren't ancient Israel. We do not live under the old covenant. We live under the new covenant with Jesus. And in many ways, the Sermon on the Mount was Jesus giving the new covenant. Moses goes up on the mountain to receive the old covenant, the first covenant from God. Jesus goes up on the mountain and gives the second covenant, the new covenant. So they're related this way. So the question often is, so why do we read this stuff? What's the point of it? What does it do for us? What do we need to know from reading all about the old covenant, the laws of the old covenant? Well, that's a good question. In anticipation of answering that question, Paul gives the answer in Romans 15:4. It won't be up on the screen, but Romans 15:4 says, "For everything that was written in the past was written to teach us, so that through endurance and the encouragement of the scriptures we might have hope." So we read the Old Testament, we read the laws of the Old Covenant, and not for us to say, oh, we need to follow those, but for us to say, what is it that we learn from this? What is it about the character of God that we need to learn? What is it about our character that we need to learn? So we're going to read these. They might seem boring. They're definitely distanced. They're definitely dated. And they're definitely not laws that we are required to keep. But they give us instruction about how we should then live today. And I hope to be able to show you the connections between Old Covenant and New Covenant, between at least how people should relate to God and one another. Because ultimately, these commandments, the Ten Commandments, and also as we will see, these other sundry laws are about how we relate to God. The first 5 commandments are how we relate to God. And the last 5 in the 10 commandments, or the 10 words, is how we relate to one another. So we're going to see that in these laws, how we relate to God and how we relate to one another. And so the 10 commandments are kind of the 10 words, are kind of the foundation of how we should then live. And these laws are the particulars about how we should then live. It's kind of the same thing with the New Testament, the New Covenant. Jesus kind of sets the foundation of it's all about salvation and grace and believing in him and receiving him and being a new creation. The old is gone, the new has come. The rest of the New Testament is really, so how does that play out? What are the particulars of the new life? So that's happening here in the Old Testament. God has gathered this people from Abraham and is making them a nation and saying, this is how you should now live. These are the particulars of what a new nation looks like, of what a new people looks like. So that's the connection that we want to make here. So it begins in Exodus 20, verse 22, and as it began in the foundation of these, the first little section says, this is how you should relate to God. This is how to be in a right relationship with God. Let's read Exodus 20, beginning at verse 22 to the end of that chapter. Then the Lord said to Moses, tell the Israelites this, you have seen for yourselves that I have spoken to you from heaven. Do not make any gods to be alongside me. Do not make for yourselves gods of silver or gods of gold. Make an altar for earth for me and sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and fellowship offerings, your sheep and your goats and your cattle. Wherever I cause my name to be honored, I will come to you and bless you. If you make an altar of stones for me, do not build it with dressed stones, for you will defile it if you use a tool on it. And do not go up to my altar on steps, lest your nakedness be exposed upon it. So God is saying to Israel, you're a new nation, you're a new people, you're just starting, I'm setting you up, and this is the way I want you to interact with me. And he reminds them again of who he is. I'm the God who speaks to you from heaven. I am the God of heaven. I am the God who you can't see. I am God alone. You've heard my voice. You know I exist. You know it's true. But I am not a God that you can see, that you can control, that you can put an image to. And so he says, make sure you don't put any other gods alongside of me. The ancient Near East mindset and culture was to have many gods. And no other nations around them had just one God. Because one God didn't seem like it was enough. So there were gods for the forest. There were gods for the streams. There were gods for the plains. There were gods for the mountains. There were gods for the plants and animals. There were gods of the insects. There were gods of health. There were gods of life. There were gods of death. Whatever situation you found yourself in life, there was a special, there was a special God for it that they set up. So each nation had their set of gods, just like ancient Egypt had their set of gods. This is why, as we read earlier, God set 10 plagues upon Egypt, and each plague was directed at one of their gods or a number of their gods. And God of Israel, the God of heaven, said, I am a greater God than all of your gods put together. And it just is me. Israel is not supposed to have an abundance or a community of gods. They are to have one God, the one God who speaks from heaven, the one God who showed up throughout those plagues to say, I am greater than the gods of the Nile. I am greater than the gods of the insects. I'm greater than the gods of the animals. I'm greater than the gods of weather. I'm greater than the gods of life, and I'm greater than the gods of death. And it wasn't a community of gods, it was God alone. He is one God. And so he says to the Israelites, make sure that you understand that I am your only God. Don't become like the other nations. Don't say, well, everybody else has 25 gods, so we should have at least 3 or 4. Don't do it. God says, I am the only God, and you do not make any gods alongside me. We still do that today. Nations still do this today. America still does this today. We might say, America might say there's one God. Actually, I don't think America says that anymore. But we set up many gods in this country. There are a lot of things that serve as idols or gods for us. One thing that I can think of is for a while, and maybe it's still the case, that many people worship angels, especially in the healthcare industry. It's popular, it's common to have angel pins. If somebody is sick or dying, you give them an angel pin. And you say, and I've heard said, this angel was an angel that will protect you. You pin it on or you put it by your pillow and you just think of God and his angels and he'll protect you. Well, what we've done is we've taken that angel pin and we've made it an idol and it represents God. God says, you are not to have any other gods alongside of me. Do not make for yourself gods of silver or gods of gold. Don't make anything that you think would be a representative of God. Because what happens is we end up serving it. We end up seeing it as God. So, we do that with crucifixes or crosses that we have on chains or whatever. We say this is a symbol of God and we put it on a chain and we wear it and we say it helps me remind me of God and helps me remind me of Jesus. But then itself can be an idol. Right? And people, oh man, I don't have the cross on. I better find my cross, or I've got to kiss that thing, or whatever it is. Because it starts out as helping us remember, or helping us keep in mind that who Jesus is and what he's done for us, but we end up serving it. It becomes an idol. And if we lose it, we find that we're in great danger because we've lost it. Or if we're not wearing it, I'm not protected. Angel pins, crosses are not God. Some other things these days that people pray to are saints, especially in Catholicism. There is a saint for every factor of life, for every place of life, anything that happens. Saint Matthew. Matthew is the saint that you would pray to if you're an accountant or if you're a banker. Saint Matthew, because he was a tax collector, has become the saint of accountants and bankers and money. So if you want a little bit more money or you're worried about your accounts or whatever, you pray to Saint Matthew. Saint Francis of Assisi is the saint for animals. So if you want to pray for the longevity of your pets, you pray to St. Francis of Assisi and he will help your pet recover or live longer. St. Valentine, which we're going to come up with in another month or so. St. Valentine is the saint of betrothed couples, is saint of love. If you want love, you want your marriage to last, you want your betrothal to last, well, you pray to St. Valentine. Almost every Catholic church, especially in other countries, but in this country too, has these saints, statues of saints. And you kiss the statue, or you place a candle at the statue, or you pray to that saint, because you're asking that saint to give you whatever he's in charge of. That's idolatry. That is simply idolatry. That is setting up saints as gods. And that is against, God says, do not make any gods beside me or alongside me. When we set up statues of saints and pray to them, when we wear crosses and kiss the crosses and feel they have special significance or special power, or angel pins, we are setting up idols, and then we have another God beside God. And God very clearly says, I am the only God that you need in life. I'm the only God you serve. I'm the only God you pray to. I'm the only God you trust, because I am the only God. And so he sets up the nation Israel and says, don't be like the rest of the nations. You don't need a plethora of gods. You don't need a community of gods. You have me. Remember the one who spoke from heaven. You can't see me, so don't set up an idol that you think might represent me. I speak from heaven, not from earth, not from an idol. I speak from heaven. I am God, so don't set up any other gods. Then he says, when you're making altars for me, he's saying not only do you need to worship me and me alone, but you need to be careful how you worship me. He says, when you make an altar, make it of earth. Make it of dirt. Ancient Near East, most altars were made of dirt. We often think they were all made of stones, but they weren't. They were a society of travelers. They were nomads. They went here and there. They were often in desert places, arid places. So they would, as they were traveling, they'd set up an altar of earth, and they would heap up earth and they would make their sacrifices on it. Perhaps if the building material was available and there were stones, they would set up stones. And God says, if you're going to make it of stones, you can do that. You can set it up with stones, but don't use a tool on it. Just use the stones you have there. Don't dress the stones. Don't cut the stones. Don't polish the stones. Don't make it into some sort of structure that you think represents me or best serves me. See, what happens is in building altars, the altars became elaborate things. They would cut the stones to fit. They would polish the stones. They would put symbols on the stones. They would put writing on the stones. They would make great elaborate altars. And what would take place is it wouldn't be so much about who you were sacrificing to, but it was the method of sacrificing. So God said, don't make it about the method of sacrificing. Don't make it about the method of worship. Don't make it about, we got to have a fancy altar and we got to put symbols on the altar, because what happened is people began to worship the altars. They began to worship the symbols on the altars. If you made an altar and you didn't have the same symbol, well, you couldn't worship on that altar. It's not right. You need these symbols. And so the symbols began to be representative of who God was. Or the structure itself began to be representative of who God was, and the altar itself became an idol. It also says, do not go up to my altar on steps, lest your nakedness be exposed on it. What was happening in ancient Near East times, and all throughout the world actually, were the altars were these great big tall structures, because the higher you were, the more spiritual you were, the closer to God you were. Therefore, your offering, your sacrifices were more acceptable, because you were showing that you were making the effort to climb up to the gods, as it were. Well, you climb up the steps and everybody's lower down and you're looking up the steps. Well, they didn't always wear, and probably many of them didn't at all have any kind of undergarments at all. And so God said, well, how is that helpful? How does that make sense? When you're climbing up to worship me, to worship God, don't climb up on steps where everybody's going to look up your skirt, kind of thing. And so God puts these requirements, these laws in place to say, be careful that your worship is about me and not about the worship. It's not the method of worship that's important. It's not the mode of worship that's important. It's not the altar that's important. It's God who's important. It's the one you're worshiping to. It's not the method and the mode. It is who we are worshiping. We do the same thing in our churches today. The method of worship becomes more important than the one we worship. The mode of worship, how we do it, becomes more important than who we are worshiping. Take, for example, communion. We're going to have communion today. And it has become a kind of a law in our church, and not in our church particularly, but in churches today, an unwritten rule that this is the way you do communion. And if you don't do communion in a certain way, then people get angry, or people get upset, or people get agitated or frustrated because this isn't the way you do communion. There is no instruction in the Bible about the method of communion other than it's about Jesus. It's about his death and his resurrection, his shedding of blood, his giving of his breaking of his body. That's the only thing. We need to keep the main thing the main thing. It's not about the method of communion. There are a variety of methods, and there should be a variety of methods, as long as it's about Jesus. We've made the method, even the order of worship. Oh, in an order of worship, you have to have this many songs or that, and you've got to do this or that. It's not about the order of worship. Some people get to the point of, well, if it used to be, the order of worship was written down in a bulletin. And if you change that order of worship, someone would come up and say, hey, this isn't the way we do it. You've added something. You've taken away from something. How can I possibly connect with God without my regular order of worship? We've built altars with cut tools. That's what we've done. An order of service becomes more important than the one we are serving. Music, the great music wars of hymns and choruses. That became an altar which people died on. That became an altar of, well, you can't sing just choruses because choruses don't glorify God. Only hymns glorify God. And if you're not singing the hymns, you're not worshiping God. And we fought over hymns and choruses, and we forgot about Jesus. And we looked less like Jesus and more like the nations around us. God is saying it's not about the method. Don't make it about the method. Just heap up some stones, heap up some earth. Don't make a big deal about cutting it and fitting it and putting symbols on it and raising it up in the air and making a great big pomp and circumstance about your worship. Hey, look at us. Look at this altar we made. Look at how tall it is. We are amazing worshipers. And God says, no, you're not. God says, keep it about the main thing. The main thing is the main thing. It's about Jesus. We have to make sure that we don't make ceremony more important than sincerity. Ancient Near East, Greek, Roman times, our times, it becomes more about ceremony than it does sincerity. And if we don't follow the right ceremony to the exact specifications, then we feel like we've done something wrong and we aren't worshiping God properly. And there's no sincerity or very little sincerity in it. I'm not saying we can't worship God by a order of worship or in certain methods. Of course we can. But we got to make sure that we understand it's about Jesus and worshiping him and serving him and not serving our methods and not serving our modes of doing it and not serving our own preferences for the way we think things should go. It's not about ceremony, it's about sincerity. It's not regulation over relationship. We fight against each other about regulations, about rules, about how things should be done, and we forget about a relationship with Christ. God comes to the Israelites and says, it's not important how you worship me, and not as important on the method of worshiping me as it is that you worship me. Keep it about God alone, he says to the Israelites. Keep it about Jesus alone, he says to us. So God starts off All of these laws, again, saying, know who I am and worship me. If you keep God as the center of your life, all of these other things will make sense. All of these other things will come. All of these other things, they'll be added to you, but keep me first. That's what he's saying to us. We could end there. That's a good enough sermon right there, and I was tempted to end there. And maybe I should end there. Maybe the next service I will end there, but you get the longer version. Because I know how much time we have, and I know how much we have to get through. So let's look at the next set of laws in verse 21, 1 through 11. We'll get to that. I want to make a few comments. So God has said, remember, be in right relationship with me. And now the rest of the laws are, let's make sure you're in right relationship with others. So that was always the two things, right? When Jesus was asked, what are the greatest commandments? Jesus said, love your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. So be right before God, be right with people. Those are the two main things. So this is what is happening here. This next set of laws, and it actually continues farther than we're going to go because of time again, but this is about Hebrew servants. Starts out, these are the laws you were to set before them, and he talks about Hebrew servants. We're going to get into this whole area of servanthood or slavery. Our English Bibles rightly translate it as servant more than slave, mostly because here in America, at least, when we think of slavery, we think of 18th and 19th century slavery that took place in our country, which is different than the type of slavery that we're talking here. There were elements of that in every culture because humans are humans, and hard hearts are hard hearts, and sin is sin, and it happens from the beginning of time as long as there were people. But we're not talking about Civil War American slavery here. So let me try to paint a picture and help you as much as I can so that we can understand what's going on here. And we'll talk about it next week as well. But there were really three reasons or three ways by which people became slaves. Okay. One was through conquering, being a conquered nation, which was largely the way it happened in the ancient Near East and even in Roman times. It was by being a conquered nation. Even Israel did this, that you conquered a nation, you were now over them, you were their quote unquote masters, and they were your slaves. And which meant that they did most of the hard physical labor in the nation. As Israel conquered some of the nations in the land of Canaan, it says that the Bible tells us that those people became the choppers of wood and the carriers of water. They kind of did the menial tasks that kept the nation going, sort of thing. So they were slaves in the sense that they were a conquered people. They weren't slaves in the sense of they had chains around their neck or their legs and all of that sort of thing, but they were a conquered people. The second way in which you became a slave was through being sold as a slave. So again, that usually came from conquered people, and as those who conquered you, the conquering people had the right to essentially almost do whatever they wanted to with you, and that often included selling you to someone else or somewhere else, kind of thing. The third way in which you became a slave, at least in ancient Near East and up to Roman times, was voluntary slavery. So there was a class of people that were voluntarily sold themselves into quote unquote slavery. But again, it's not the 18th, 19th century slavery of England and Americas. Okay. So I don't know how I can well, that takes probably another 50 minutes to go through. So I'm trying to give you the quick notes about this. Slavery that takes people from other countries and sells them to different countries, or slavery that steals people for the purpose of selling them and making them subservient, is always wrong. Okay, turn with me to, I don't know if we have this. Oh, goodness, Dan. I'm not sure if I would. 21:16.
Yes.
Exodus 21:16. Good, I'm glad I gave that to you. In 21:16, which we'll get more to next week, but it says, anyone who kidnaps another and either sells him or still has him when he's caught must be put to death. This is talking about slave traders. This is talking about those who would kidnap people for the purpose of selling them to somebody else and enslaving them. This was always wrong in God's sight. A lot of people would say, well, the Old Testament doesn't say anything about slavery being wrong. Yes, it does, right here. Exodus 21:16. There are other verses as well, but anyone who kidnaps another and either sells him or still has him when he's caught must be put to death. Let me turn now to a verse in the New Testament, 1 Timothy 1:8 through 10. 1 Timothy chapter 1, verses 8 through 10. We know that the law is good if one uses it properly. We also know that the law is made not for the righteous, but for lawbreakers and rebels, for the ungodly and sinful. So this is kind of, he's going to list what is sinful and ungodly. For the unholy and irreligious, for those who kill their fathers and mothers, for murderers, for adulterers and perverts, for slave traders and liars and perjurers, for whatever else is contrary to sound doctrine, that conforms to the glorious gospel of the blessed God, which he entrusted to me. So very clearly, Paul says, slave traders are, slave trading is sinful. So does the Bible speak out against slavery? You bet it does. Okay, so Exodus 21:16, 1 Timothy 1, verses 8 through 10. There is that class of stealing people, of capturing people for the purpose of enslaving them, selling them, making them less than human. That is always wrong. And God does speak out against that and continues to speak out against that and has no place, especially in the church. There's what the Bible speaks of here in chapter 21 of Exodus is more of the voluntary slavery. It's more of the conquered, being conquered slavery. It's what God is doing is saying, look, there's always going to be this sense of conquering people and a conquered people. The Israelites know that full well. They were in Egypt, and the Egyptians put them into slavery. They were the ones who made the bricks. The Israelites, the ones who made the bricks, who carried the water, who did all that menial task. The Israelites understand what it means to be in that class of slavery. They get it. They know that servanthood, that servitude, which is probably the best word to use for this, is servitude. To be under somebody else and really have no choice but to kind of obey what they say, sort of thing. That's where Israel lived. And now they're out of that, and God says, okay, you're going to encounter this in the nations around you, and it's going to come into your nation. Because the reality is you live among people who have sinful natures, and you yourself have a sinful nature. So you're going to one day say, hey, we should have some people who are slaves to us. We should have put people into servitude over us. And God says, I know you're going to do that. I know that's going to happen because you're a people of hard hearts, and you're sinful, and that's just the way society is. Very similar to God's concession for divorce. Moses says, well, God knew because of your sinful hearts that you were going to do it anyway, so he wanted to make sure you do it in a way that respects people, treats people right. This is kind of what's happening here. Slavery is a part of humanity because humans are hard-hearted, because humans are sinful people, because humans don't treat each other well. So if you're going to be my people, if you're going, and I'm going to be your God, here's the way you are going to do this so it treats people well. and you understand who I am. Okay? I'm going to turn first to a couple of other passages before we get to the one in Exodus 21 because it helps us understand it. Leviticus 25. Leviticus 25, 39 through 43, I believe is what I have there. Leviticus 25. If one of your countrymen becomes poor among you and sells himself to you, this is the selling himself into slavery, do not make him work as a slave. He is to be treated as a hired worker or a temporary resident among you. He is to work for you until the year of Jubilee. Then he and his children are to be released, and he will go back to his own clan and to be the property of his forefathers. Because the Israelites are my servants, whom I brought out of Egypt, they must not be sold as slaves. Do not rule over them ruthlessly, but fear your God. So God says, look, this is going to happen, and this is the way you're going to deal with it well. This is the way you're going to deal with it that honors me and honors people. Then we have Deuteronomy 15, 13 through 15. Deuteronomy 15, 13 through 15. Did I start with verse 12 or just with verse 13 on your notes?
Okay, 13.
Okay, let me start with 12. Bit better context. If a fellow Hebrew, a man or a woman, sells himself to you and serves you 6 years, in the 7th year you must let him go free. And when you release him, do not send him away empty-handed. Supply him liberally from your flock, from your threshing floor, and your winepress. Give to him as the Lord your God has blessed you. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and the Lord God remembered you. That is why I give you this command today. But if you're just to 15, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's stop there. The other will be for the next day. So there's very clear laws about this servitude, this servanthood. Most of the class of slavery, again, it's not the same as the 18th and 19th century slavery. There was that took place, but most of that slavery was because you were a conquered nation, and that was just expected. Now we're conquered, we got to do what they tell us to do until we can rebel and, conquer them, sort of thing. That was just the cycle of life that they lived in, even up to Roman times. Interestingly enough, in Roman times, slavery was looked down on, actually. There were a class of people who were slaves, but not, again, the 18th and 19th, early 20th century slavery kind of thing. They were a class of people that they might have been a conquered people, but there were laws on how you were to treat your slaves. Articles, documents from that time frame, and particularly the 1st century AD in Rome, shows that the class of slaves actually had the same rights as freedmen. There were still rights for Romans and non-Romans, but slaves had the same rights as non-Romans freemen had. In fact, it was almost better to be in the class of slaves than it was to be in the class of poor freemen, because those who were poor, who were free and who were poor in Roman times, often slept in the streets, didn't have much to eat, were subject to disease and sickness and all of that kind of thing, whereas the class of slaves, they were taken care of. They were given housing, they were given food, they were given medicine, they were given clothing. In fact, in Rome, there came a time where the class of slaves were dressing just the same as the class, kind of the middle to upper class in Roman society of the freemen. And so they actually made laws to say, well, we got to distinguish between who is free and who isn't, who's Roman, who's not. And so they had to wear particular articles on their clothing to distinguish them. But slaves were not treated poorly. There were those that were treated poorly, but the class of slaves in Roman times, ancient Near East times, was a class of people that were kind of like minimum wage workers. Okay, you got to understand that there wasn't this economy in which everybody got a job and everybody had a job, and you could just go out and pick up another job and all that kind of thing. That just didn't exist. And so if you couldn't make it, you were, you couldn't put bread on the table for your family, and you couldn't work, or there weren't jobs available for you, or you were a terrible farmer and you lost your land, or whatever the case might be. Then you actually said, I want to sell myself to someone else. They will give my family the money to buy, which buys for me, and I will work for them. And even up to Roman times, usually about 7 years, it was expected that you would be free. Not only that, but in Roman times also, and in ancient Near East times, you could buy your freedom back. So there was you did get paid a certain amount for your servitude. Also, it was very common in Roman times for you to buy slaves for the purpose of teaching them a trade. You would teach them a trade, they'd work for you for a while in that trade, and then you would free them and set them up in business, and you would have a share in whatever they made. And so there was that expectation. It was kind of like you were their intern or something or whatever. So not all slavery was, as we think, the 18th, 19th, 20th century slavery stuff. Okay, so this is the kind of thing that God is addressing, that voluntary, I'm going to be this special class of people. And God said, you need to make sure you take care of this special class of people. So that brings us to Exodus 21, 1 through 11, and we'll quickly go through some of this. If you buy a Hebrew servant, he is to serve you for 6 years. So there's a time limit. But in the 7th year, he shall go free without paying anything. In other words, he didn't have to buy his own freedom. In the 7th year, you were to set those who sold themselves into slavery free. It's like signing a contract. I'll work for this business for 6 years. And once the contract's over, then I'll move on. He shall go free without paying anything. If, verse 3, he comes alone, he's to go free alone. But if he has a wife when he comes, she is to go with him. Okay, that makes sense. If his master gives him a wife and she bears him sons or daughters, the woman and her children shall belong to her master, and only the man shall go free. So it was possible to sell yourself into slavery. I want to work for this guy. I want to be in servitude to this guy. I will get clothing, I'll get food, I'll get shelter. This is a good thing for me. I'll do this for 6 years. In that 6 years' time, you might have it in mind that maybe I'll get a wife. Or you might enjoy what's going on in that household, and you will want to serve there for all. And the master of the household, the one who's hired you, essentially says, hey, I would love to give you a wife. Maybe it's his daughter, maybe it's one of his other servants, who knows? You knew full well what that meant. There wasn't any trick about it. If you took a wife that was in servitude to the master's household, then you would stay with that wife. You had that option. Or you could just leave. You could say, well, I had a wife and kids for a few years. It was great, but I'm out of here. Or in verse 5, you could either go free, but if that servant declares, I love my master and my wife and children and do not want to go free, then his master must take him before the judges. He shall take him to the door or the doorpost and pierce his ear with an awl, and then he will be his servant for life. So a servant could say, this is a great life. I love my wife. I love my children. I love where I'm at in life. I'm being well taken care of. I'm doing better here than I would on my own. So I will commit myself to work for this company for the rest of my life. And so he would get his ear pierced, essentially, against the doorpost of the house. His flesh would be mixed with the house. You were now part of this household, sort of thing. Verse 7, if a man sells his daughter as a servant, she is not to go free as men servants do. In other words, you can't just buy a woman and then just say, yeah, get out of here. There's stipulations. There's actually more protection for women's servants than there was for men's servants. Let's read on. If she does not please the master who has selected her for himself, he must let her be redeemed. He has no right to sell her to foreigners because he has broken faith with her. If he selects her for his son, he must grant her the rights of a daughter. If he marries another woman, he must not deprive the first one of her food, clothing, and marital rights. If he does not provide her with these three things, she is to go free without any payment of money. So there are three conditions. Often, unfortunately, and this was part of their culture, and we can, from our cultural viewpoint, look at it and say, that's terrible, what awful people. But that was their culture. One day, people are going to look at our culture and they're going to say, that was terrible, that was awful, what terrible people. It's the culture we live in. We can't place our culture on their culture and judge it through our eyes. At any rate, a father and mother had the right to sell their children. If they were economically in economic hardship, they could sell a son or a daughter, and they would sell them into slavery for 6 years and be able to live that way. Often with daughters, the intention was to sell your daughter to someone who needed a wife. So whether it was the man of the household kind of thing who wanted to buy them, said, I need a wife. I'm looking at your daughter. I think this would be a good match. I'll buy her from you. Or, in 3 years, my son's going to need a wife, and I think they'd be a good match. So you sell your daughter. He buys the daughter. If that's the case, then you are not to treat that girl as a slave or a servant. You treat her and give her the rights of a daughter. God is saying you don't treat people poorly. You treat them as with rights and with concern and with dignity. So if she's selected as a wife, then treat her as a daughter. Often what would happen is people would buy girls with the pretense of, yes, they'll one day be my son's wife, but then they decide no, and so they sell her away to be a prostitute and make money off of her that way, which was an abuse of people. So God's law was saying don't abuse women this way. So if somehow he decides, no, I decided not to, well, that daughter doesn't have to pay for her freedom. That woman doesn't have to be stuck there. She can be redeemed, usually by the family, bought back at whatever price it was, or by someone else. But she's not to be treated as a slave or treated poorly or sold or made more money off of. The second thing is she could be married to the son or to the man who bought her, and later the man says, yeah, I think I need a second wife. Well, you can't just throw away the first one. And again, anyway, a cultural thing, we don't have time for all that. But you can't just throw her away. She needs to have food, clothing, shelter, and a family. That's what you promised her when you bought her, so you do that. You just don't throw her away. And if you're not willing to do that, you don't just, she gets to go free. She doesn't have to pay anything. And remember, keep it in context with Deuteronomy 15 that says, if you buy a slave and when it's time to go, give them from your flock, from your herds, from your vineyards. Make sure you provide for them. So God is saying, treat people knowing that I am God, knowing that I made people, all people. You don't treat people of a lesser economic status than you as less than you. You don't take advantage of them. You don't beat them up. You don't make them feel like they're inhuman. You treat them with dignity, with respect, knowing that God created them. They are all God's people. Yes, they might not have the same kind of economic status as you do, and they might want to be in servitude, but you don't treat them like they're lesser. you give them full rights. So this is what God is saying to the nation Israel. He's saying you're going to come across and you're going to be tempted by this whole slavery deal that you see all around you. And you might even want to make people slaves because you yourself have been enslaved, and you want to be on the other end of it, but don't do it. Yes, there's a class of slaves. There's a class, but it's not forever. They get their freedom. Treat them well. Understand who God is. It's about relationships. God is saying, when you worship me in relationship, not in regulations. When you treat people, treat them in relationship, not in regulations. The whole law that God gives to the nation Israel is all about relationships. This is how we work together and work with God in relationship. End of lesson for today. The question is, how do we treat people? In relationship or through regulations? How do we view God? In regulations or in relationship? Let's make sure that we understand that God wants us to know him in relationship, not in regulations, not in the methods of worship, but just in relationship, worshiping me and him, us and him. And let's treat people not by regulations, not by the letter of the law, not by what rights they have or don't have, or we want to, it's by relationship. They're people, graced by God just as you and I are graced by God. So let's start treating each other as people in relationships, as God treats us, as people in relationships by his grace. So may God bless you. May God be gracious to you and cause his face to shine upon you. May God turn his eyes, direct his gaze upon you, and may he give you peace. Thanks for joining us.